I'm Silva Harapetian. Welcome to my show. We talk ordinary people, extraordinary stories, living life on their own terms. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. This is the Silva Harapetian Show. Today, we're going to be talking about voting, the importance of the immigrant vote, particularly in 2020. Joining us today, a woman who has worked tirelessly and for many, many years to make sure that we have everyone registered to vote. She is a community activist. She's an advocate for human and civil rights. I honestly don't know how she finds the time to be on so many boards and involved in so many different organizations. She's a public servant. Her passion is education, youth empowerment, women's rights. Elen Asatryan, if you don't know her, you should probably get to know her because she is a force to be reckoned with. She is currently on the LA County Community Voters Outreach Committee. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So she is very well aware of the challenges and all of the things that we have to do in order to get the vote out. I want to make sure that everyone listening to this understands that this is not a partisan show. This is a bipartisan show. Regardless of what your view is, we here today want to talk about the importance of using the power of your voice. And if you know me, I talk about that all the time, and voting is one of those very important things, particularly as an immigrant community, as an Armenian, as someone who was born in Iran, so I know the Persian community. And if you live anywhere in the Los Angeles area, you know that there are a lot of different minorities and immigrants that make LA the melting, beautiful pot that it is. But no matter where you live in this country, there has never been a time that is more important for you to exercise your vote and your voice than there is today on November 3rd, because our future depends on it. Just, you have to talk about what is important to you and you have to take a stand. And here to talk with us about that is Elen Asatryan. Thank you for joining us. I know you're very busy, but I know this is an important and very powerful topic and close to your heart.
It is. It's actually the reason that I got involved at a very early age. I think elections in general and seeing the power of a single vote, especially in a local election, and seeing the difference that you can make with that single vote, I think inspired me to actually be involved in politics and help others use their voice. It's not really finding their voice, but using their voice in the electoral process.
We all have a voice. It's a matter of how we use it. And I think sometimes we forget how powerful it is, whether it's casting a ballot or just speaking up about what's happening. And considering what's happening in politics today with the pandemic and the racial injustice that we've been seeing, there's never been a time that it's more important to do that. And I know you've been a very active and vocal participant on all of those fronts. Can you talk to me a little bit about where you found the passion and the courage to speak up that way? Because you and I know that in the communities that we live in, that's not necessarily something that is encouraged or even maybe sometimes even supported.
Well, I grew up in a very different Glendale that we see today. And mostly at that time, the Armenian American community was an immigrant community. I grew up in a city where the city government and the school structures didn't actually properly represent or reflect the community that they were serving. I grew up in schools where I saw my fellow classmates being pushed against walls and being targeted for being Armenian. And so I'd say my first involvement was really, middle school and high school, and going to school board meetings and raising issue with what was going on in our schools. And then because I was so involved on campus, Rafi Manukian was running for Glendale City Council in 1999, and they came to recruit volunteers, and I went. In helping register Armenian Americans to vote during that election and really helping them through the voting process, which was very intimidating for them, made me realize what an important role each of us can play. And I'd say, I want to say it was in 2000, there was a lady that used to come to Glendale City Council meetings every Tuesday and tell Armenians to go back where they came from. That was a very painful, I don't know why I was watching city council meetings at the age of 16, but it was something that was very heartbreaking for me to see. And more importantly, was the silence that came from the council members when she was spewing this really hatred into the community. So one of the times, my brother is about 10 years younger than me, as I was watching and she came on, and he didn't have anything positive to say about white people, hearing what she was saying about Armenians. And at this time, he was like 6 years old. And that really sat really negative with me, because he was, you know, a 6-year-old making assumptions about a whole group of people based off of one individual. And so after having that very long conversation with him, I actually went to the city council meeting, and I said, though I understand it's your First Amendment right to use oral communication, I would hope that the city council would actually take action in turning off the microphone, knowing that this is what she says every Tuesday, to at least not, you know, disperse that into the community. And lo and behold, they actually took action right there on the spot, which is never heard of during, or, you know, because I went during oral communications as well, and she never came back. So, you know, for me, between that initial campaign, which led to many other campaigns, and really turned into a career built on passion over the years and volunteerism, that was my big cue, how one person can really make, you know, the tiniest dent perhaps that can have ripple effects down the line.
Wow, what a story. You know, I grew up, or I shouldn't say grew up, because I really just got into the country in 1988. So just, you know, a few years before you did. And I actually did graduate from Hoover as well. Yeah. And I remember those moments and remember being told to go back. And I remember feeling like I didn't belong, or we didn't belong. And it wasn't just Armenians, it was anyone who just looked anything other than what, you know, the population had been used to. Right. And I really commend you, because I don't think I mean, I was pretty active and vocal, but I don't think I was that active and vocal, and didn't realize the power of the voice in the arena that you discovered it in. So, you know, I went a completely different route. I went the journalism route, because I was like, I'm going to change things. So, but I love that. I love the passion.
Honestly, I don't know why I chose to do that. And, you know, and it wasn't just school board meetings. I remember being called by my classmates out of class to go to the dean's office because somebody was about to get suspended. Or,
oh my God, they used to do the same thing.
It was just like, you know,
all the time. They used to call me out of the office
too. I have a
too.
Constitution book in my backpack. I don't know why. You know, like, I think back now, it's kind of, the stories are very bizarre.
That's so weird. I feel like we've had parallel lives. This is so strange. But I love that, because at a young age, you discover the power of one person speaking up about something that just doesn't sit right and isn't. So I'm going to ask you, as just from one Armenian woman to the next, how did you handle the backlash? How have you handled the pushback that you get from people who don't quite get what you're doing?
I kind of continue on my own path. I don't actually give that much energy to that. I actually don't give energy to that. I think when I do see backlash, it reaffirms my commitment to the issues that I care about, that I'm passionate about. So they actually become my driving force. And so if I continue to see racism, whether it's against my own community or any other group, and what we're seeing now with Black Lives, has been continuing on for centuries, or whether it's about, you know, standing up for women's rights and, you know, being in a position where you're constantly on a daily basis fighting for that double standard that exists in absolutely every industry. Those are all things that inspire me on a daily basis to continue my work. So I don't give it the energy I think that most people give it. I kind of turn that energy into action.
I love that. I ask these questions because I know that there's people out there who are trying to figure out what to do with all of that. And there's people out there who are in the midst of, for example, speaking out and being, supporting Black Lives Matter, and they are getting pushbacks and they're getting ostracized, and not just within our own communities, but just everywhere. And I think
I'll tell you, the backlash, especially with my involvement with and speaking out against Black Lives, has been unreal. And the kind of hate that I received, I'll tell you, I think there were about maybe 2 days, one or 2 days where I removed all the apps from my phone because I was getting thousands of messages a day, basically. Not none of them. There were plenty that were positive, but words that I've never imagined people using. And interestingly enough, it became to a point where I couldn't respond to people. I couldn't have that many individual conversations, and so I needed. And again, this leads me back to, where do you put your energy? I can dedicate a certain amount of time to respond to those, but with everything that I respond and what's happening on social media nowadays, that means that I'm not actually putting in my energy where I could be to be more effective.
Yeah.
So
thank you for that. Thank you for being transparent about that, because part of the reason why I started these conversations is because I don't think we talk enough about the things that we need to talk about, like the kind of hate we receive when we stand up for things that other people don't agree with. I know that you've gotten those messages because my inbox was full of them as well. My inbox has been full of them for years. If I reported on women's equality, if I reported on gay and lesbian and transgender matters, if I reported on Black Lives Matter, if I post anything that is the things that people are capable of saying, it's really sometimes really disheartening and heartbreaking and really sad. I feel just like you, this is for people who are on the fence, who are not sure about, they know where they stand, but they're not sure about whether they should publicly actually declare it. This is for those people to say, there are people like you and me and so many like us out there who are taking a stance publicly, and we are speaking our truth, regardless of the backlash and regardless of losing friends, regardless of the terrible things that other people have to say, because it is more important to speak up today and stand in your truth than it is to continue to have a friendship with people or interaction with people or have other people's approval.
I'll tell you, I don't think through the process, and this isn't, I've been involved in politics, I guess, at this point over 20 years, and so with every issue, there's been some dialogue one way or another. But my point has always been to approach people with love and respect and kindness, and so regardless of how someone may act towards me, I choose to be me, and that me is being respectful. My biggest concern right now, especially leading up to elections, is this meme culture that is kind of setting policy. I see a lot of people posting about things that, are so far away from the policy positions, and I see it kind of take flight, and I'm seeing it on different accounts where people take this as facts versus actually doing the homework and seeing whether or not that elected official or candidate actually took that position, or if, what's being described in that meme or that headline is actually
accurate.
What transpired. And it's a very, very scary path to go down. And, especially even with like Black Lives, just because somebody speaks out against racism and discrimination that's going on in this country and police brutality does not mean that same person is also okay with the violence and the looting. And just because, and I'll tell you, I may be a Democrat, but for me, there seems to be, especially now leading up to elections, that somehow if you're Republican, then you're automatically racist. If you're a Democrat, then you're standing up for it. To categorize people just by their party preference is, is such a
small-minded
way of looking at it. And there have been incredible local, state, and federal officials that have been part of either party that have taken on these causes and have stood up. And there have been those that, regardless of their party, have actually, taken certain actions that have brought us to where we are today. So, though my, whether it's social issues or fiscal issues and programming that I believe in that aligns more with the Democratic Party, this whole hate culture that's being created is extremely concerning to me. And I think the one thing that I'm happy with is the ability to have the dialogue with my Republican friends and having the opportunity to, whether it's local and state level policymakers, to be able to work across the aisle on policy issues that impact the daily lives of every Californian. And, if we're working on federal issues, then everybody in the United States.
Yeah, I think the importance of having to educate yourself. Just as much as I watch MSNBC and I watch CNN, I watch just as much Fox News. Just as much as I read the New York Times, I read the Washington Post and the Economist. Just as much as I listen to NPR, I also listen to Al Jazeera. I think it is incredibly important, especially, and this is the segue to talking about immigrant communities, particularly for immigrant communities, to stay informed using all platforms and all different types of information in order for you to then be able to make your decision. It's a personal decision on where you stand and what your views are. And this is the beauty of this country, is that we can respect everyone's decisions. But to, like you said, to see these memes and to see these headlines reposted or posted or retweeted by people without having done any fact checking or any reading is very disheartening. So if this is anything, if you take anything from this conversation so far, we hope that you are inspired to expand your mind a little bit more about what's going on in this country. Because
read the details. And
with the details, yes.
And one policy issue can never be summed down to a meme, is what I'd like to convey here.
And neither can a party, neither can a candidate, neither can a person. So I think, one of the most important things within our community is, one, to learn to respect each other and each other's views, and also make sure that we communicate with love, because I really, I don't know if I can take another hateful message in my inbox. But also to help each other grow in this space, because our vote is important and it counts. What we say and how we say it counts. We are a huge population in Los Angeles, and I know some of the work that you've done with voter registration and the turnouts have actually shifted some elections. So can we talk a little bit about the importance of that and the significance of that?
Sure. So I can actually go back to 1999. I was volunteer throughout the Immigrants campaign, but that was really the turning point for the Armenian community. During the campaign, we registered, I believe, 4,000 to 5,000, if not 10,000 Armenians to vote. And for the first time, Armenians became a voting bloc in the city of Glendale. Rafi Minuchin obviously won that election, and he won it by Armenian votes, which was the first time a candidate won because of the Armenian community. And the headline in the Glendale News Press the next morning was, "The sleeping bear has woken." And he was referring to the Armenian American community that all of a sudden found its voice at the ballot box. And so that became kind of the starting point for the Armenian community, here in Glendale, and then obviously Los Feliz area, like Little Armenia, Hollywood area. And of course, as the community grew and shifted, whether it's Pasadena or the Valley, then there were voter registration programs that were implemented to ensure that we also registered community members in these different areas. So I used to be the executive director of the ANC in Glendale, then ANC Western Region, and in between those posts, we launched a program called High Votes, which had one purpose and one purpose only: to register Armenian Americans to vote and get them out to vote on election day. And so within about a 2 to 3 year period, we registered over 50,000 Armenians to vote just in LA County alone. And when we talk about like immigrant communities voting, let's keep in mind that, and I hope that one thing people have taken away from COVID is how important local elections are. Everybody's always worried about presidential, but the local elections are the ones that really impact your daily life. You see now how the decisions that your council members make or board of supervisors for the county make all the difference for you and how you operate and live in the city that you live in. And so right after Rafi Minuchin's campaign, Paul Krikorian, who's currently Los Angeles City Council member, ran for state assembly, which also galvanized a whole new group of people in the 43rd Assembly District to register to vote. And with each of these campaigns, and every time you had an Armenian candidate, you had a group of Armenian kids that all of a sudden became involved in the political process, right? And so, because they were inspired by their own to be involved and to kind of make a difference for their own community. So, though Rafi Minuchin was the kickoff, Paul Krikorian ran in 2000. He lost. Congressman Schiff's race was a very important one that the Armenian community played a very big role in determining who won that election. If you remember the Herman battle that went on a couple of years ago, the Armenian communities both played a very important part in that election in deciding who gets elected. And I'll tell you, so for example, in 2009, I believe it was, 2009 or 2011, there's been too many elections. For example, Rafi Minuchin won by 265 votes. The recent LA City Council District 7 special elections was decided by 800 some votes. I mean, these are Senator Portantino, who currently is the appropriations chair for the state of California, lost his first race by 2 votes. 2 votes. Me and you. So, when people think that they don't, their voice doesn't matter or their vote doesn't matter, there's many of elections that I can point to and say, hey, if we didn't have this block of people voting or participating, then the outcome would have been very different, and the representation that we got as a community would have been very different.
Yeah, and that does make a difference, because who you elect within your city and your county, and you're right, during the pandemic, it's been very obvious the quality of your life and your lifestyle within your community and the city, and expanding to LA County, and of course, the state as a governor, and of course, and your representatives, they're the ones who then go work for you on your behalf in holding people accountable, making sure that there's money to be spent on different programs, and and holding other people accountable for the things that they're not supposed to be doing. So
Right.
the trickle down effect is important, and I think this is a part of the education, and paying attention to the details is extremely important.
Well, and if I may add, the campaign element and the elected position element are really, really important in American politics, right? When we talk about, just electing somebody that's right and will represent you, at the end of the day, when campaigns kick off, the first thing that a candidate and his team looks at is who votes. They're going to go after the votes, right? And so, for example, if they see that the Armenian community is participating in large numbers and they're a voting bloc, then they actually pay attention and come up with policies that impact that community and how they would serve them. Mm-hmm. And when they get elected, in order to get reelected, they need to, when they're in office, cater to that community and that voting bloc. So my participation in campaigns in particular has always been to kind of bring it back to my community and say, if we're not showing up on those polls and breakdowns of voting blocks, then no one's going to pay attention to what we need as a community. It's not going to provide the resources or work on policy issues that matter to us.
Right. And that was a really concise way of answering really why the immigrant vote is so important. Right? Because if you want resources and you want your voice heard and you want things done within your community, if you are a voting bloc and you show up in numbers, then the person who's running for office has to reverse engineer their campaign in order to cater to you. So that was a perfect way of explaining it. But
and if I may add, and if you are living in a district that you actually don't, by population are not a big a big population within that district, one of the things that's very powerful is to create partnerships with other minority groups in solidifying your vote and your concerns and your issues. And the Armenian American community did that with, for example, the Korean community up in Lakhersen area, Laknyada area, where there's a heavy Korean population. When I was at ANC Glendale and we were working on policy issues for popular representation for different departments, when we talked about the Armenian community, we also talked about the Korean community and its needs because it kind of went hand in hand at the time with respect to the population versus representation within city government.
Right. Let's talk about the challenge of getting the immigrant community and the immigrant voters out, particularly during this election, particularly since we're still in the middle of a pandemic, particularly because there's been so much misinformation about where this comes from and what the reasons are and how you protect yourself and mask and no mask. And quite frankly, I have watched some very concerning and alarming shows and conversation and rhetoric in our own language, whether it be in Farsi or Armenian, with misinformation informing a huge population of people of things that are not accurate, particularly when you talk about people who come from former communist countries, but people who come from former regimes like Iran, where you had a regime where I feel like some of the stuff I'm watching now, it's what I used to see and hear about back, where I used to be, with people getting kidnapped in vans and taken somewhere where you don't know. Let's talk about some of the challenges and some of the hurdles that we have to overcome in order for us to have confidence that we need to show up at the polls and we need to cast our ballots.
So I definitely think you nailed it, because when we were doing voter registration, especially with within the communities that had language barriers, that had just become citizens, or they were a particular voting bloc, there was a distrust in government, distrust in the electoral process, because of where they come from and how they've always felt like their voice doesn't matter. And so I think it was building that trust, and one of the most important things, and that is why the High Voice program still exists and is in full force that the ANC Western Region and its local chapters handle. That is why programs like that are so important, because if you are just a government entity or a community organization that doesn't really understand that minority group, and your makeup does not include those that speak the same language and come from the same backgrounds, you're not going to be able to build that trust in order for them to feel comfortable enough to fill out that voter registration form, in order for them to call you and say, hey, I don't know how to fill out my ballot, how do I do it? Mm-hmm. And one thing for certain is that since 2012, every time we've opened up a headquarters for High Votes in the different targeted areas for elections, what we've seen is voter turnout that's 4 times more than the ones that we haven't opened up. And so regardless of how many years it's been, and so I always count back to 1999, right? And obviously that number has grown over the years, but I mean, it's been so many election cycles at this point that you would think that the community itself, and for the most part they do feel comfortable with the voting process, but there's this hand-holding that happens. There's that reminder, the urgency, and the importance of just getting out and voting, regardless of who they choose to vote for. And so I wholeheartedly agree with you on that. I think it's it also applies to the census, because for them the concept of being counted and the government knowing where you are is a whole other thing. And I don't know if it's with every immigrant community, but one of the big things I've heard within our own with voter registration has been this myth that somehow you get called for jury duty if you register to vote. And I don't know why that would be a bad thing. I've never been called. I would love to be a jury by the way. But I do want to debunk that myth, because if you have a driver's license or a ID, you're already on that list. And that is why a lot of folks that are actually not citizens incorrectly receive the jury duty notice that then they have to respond to.
So just to clarify this myth, voter registration doesn't necessarily mean you are going to be called for jury duty. The fact that you have a driver's license and you're already in the system, that determines jury duty. So
right, you'll already be on the roster if you have a driver's license or an ID.
Right.
Through the DMV, so voter registration doesn't change that. And I have no idea where this myth started, but we've been trying to debunk this for many, many years, and somehow.
Okay, now I'm curious. What are some of the other things that you've heard? I want to be. I think we can be a little amused.
The other one, and this again comes from depending on what country they've come from, right? Is that elections are already decided, and that this is all, just a big show. And I'll tell you, what I've seen at the polls at every election, and how we've kind of organized. We talk about voter repression nowadays, and some of the methods that may be, hindering people from voting. For many, many years, all the way to this last election, we actually, as an Armenian community, had poll monitors at key poll locations that made sure that people weren't turned away. I'll go back to Paul Krikorian's school board race in Burbank. I want to say it was 2001 or 2002. And, for example, 8 p.m., the polls are supposed to close, but if you're online, you can vote. And the line was just out the door and around the block with Armenian Americans that wanted to vote. And the poll worker, by the way, poll workers are basically volunteers who had a couple of hours of training, just something that I think the county, we need to do a more thorough job in training folks. So the individual insisted that they close the door, and I happened to be the monitor for that location, and asking people not to leave. And I literally held the door open with my body, and I was thrown out and called the clerk to make sure the clerk came and like asked everybody else to stay in line. And sure enough, like 5-10 minutes later, the clerk showed up and insisted that they open the door so people can vote. But from people being turned away, Armenians have a particular last name or a name that
we are easily identifiable. That's for sure.
Right, and so a lot of times we would see that they'd be asked for IDs, and if they didn't have it, they would be turned away. When this last election was different because you could vote at any polling location in the county, but prior to that, you had to go to your own polling location. What people didn't know is if you actually ended up in the wrong polling location, you could just vote provisionally, and the chances that somebody leaves a polling location and actually goes to theirs is pretty much non-existent, right? And so our big fight was to ensure that people, if they showed up at the wrong polling location, were given the opportunity to vote, and they were, folks were just not turned away because there was a language barrier. They didn't know how to do that. So I know that there are a lot of communities that do this, and it depends on the election cycle and who's monitoring them. I'll tell you that the Glendale, LA, and clerks, and then the county register actually, they've done a great job in now recruiting Armenian poll workers. So that also helps alleviate some of this community organizing around having poll monitors and making sure people aren't turned away because there's a familiar face when they walk in.
Yeah. And it's incredibly important to also understand the process, right? If you don't understand the process, then you don't know that you can actually vote as long as you are in line. If you don't understand the process, you don't know that you can vote provisionally if you're at the wrong polling site. So where can you send people? Where can people find those types of process-related information just to be prepared for 2020, if this is the first time they're going to be voting, if this is the first time they're going to help someone else get to the poll? What can you share with us some resources that we can actually let people have?
So lavote.net would have all the information that you need. It'll also have like a voter's bill of rights. As you're aware, they're looking at doing an all-mail ballot system. But that also doesn't mean that there aren't going to be voting places people can stop at to actually vote in place. It's just going to look very different than it did in the past with all the different polling locations. And the county registrar is currently working on those locations and identifying those that people can actually stop by and vote in person or drop off their ballot without actually using mail to drop them off. But lavote.net would be the place that you would be able to find any elections information, and then your Bill of Rights as a voter. You can also register to vote online there. They actually link it up to DMV now, so it's a very, very simple application that you fill out online, and it also grabs your information and your signature off of DMV. And so if you do register online, one of the things I'd like to note is make sure when you get your ballot to sign your ballot the same way you signed on your driver's license, because they check the signatures to decide whether or not your vote counts, and it was you that actually voted.
And most importantly for this year, since we're going to be able to vote via mail, is to not wait till the last minute.
No matter who you're voting for, and no matter whether or not you think your vote makes a difference or not, to please go out and vote, because at the end of the day, we are as strong as our numbers at the ballot box. And that applies to every single minority community that makes up this very diverse city of LA and LA County and California.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your time. You've been listening to the Silva Harapetian Show. We'll see you next time. I'm Silva Harapetian. We talk ordinary people, extraordinary stories, living life on their own terms.